In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In Full Zoom. I'm Nestor Licanto, and I'd like to welcome our guest for this week. He is Tyrone Taitano, and he is the director of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, what we like to call BSP. And we're here to talk a little bit about the census that just came out. Half a day, Tyrone. How are you? Long time.
Good morning, Nestor.
Let me just start off. Were you as surprised as a lot of people were with the results of the census, which showed, I think, a 3.5% decrease in our population?
Yes, I have to say I was, particularly since, after the surprise of the 2010 census, which for a number of people we thought it was low. However, when you sort of think about it, it's not that much of an unexpected outcome. I mean, there are certain things that we know anecdotally. We know the last decade has been a hard economic one, which by naturally not only discourages in-migration, but maybe encourage out-migration to do so here. There are some stats that we had before this, including a declining birth rate and a rising birth rate, which is something that is not unique to Guam. It's sort of a demographic feature across the country, which has generally been offset by immigration. And there's been anecdotal evidence, though, that the major fuel of migration to Guam has been from the FA states. The pattern of it has, in fact, over the past decade. And you're still seeing migration out from the FAS, but not necessarily to Guam, but places like Minnesota and Arkansas, for example. So there's that. Now, how to quantify it, we'll need even some of the further data sets. There are also other stuff that we knew just factually from other counts here. For example, we knew the H2 labor population was drastically down than what is in 2010. And when we take a look at the breakdown of the population count for sectors like Harmon Industrial Park, which historically has been a place to house barracks housing for H2 workers here, the number of the population and the housing units have declined. So, there's all these factors that sort of feed into it. One of the more curious things that we plan to explore when we get further data sets is the compensation of the military population that would include active duty military and dependents. Now, active duty military have increased over the last decade, but what we would like to see is how it is done to the dependent population. Now, Anderson Air Force Base has recorded a decline in on-base population and a decline in on-base housing units. Now, of course, when you focus on base, that doesn't give you the full picture of the military population because a lot of them live in civilian areas, but it is reflected in housing areas that have been shut down. For example, Finnegadgen, that used to have residence for a couple hundred people and close to a couple hundred residential units, and it's now 0-0 in both categories in terms of housing units and in terms of population. The Nimitz Annex, that one has also declined. It's reflected of the fact that the naval housing area in Emmett Hill has not only been shut down, but torn down. And I think the only people living up there is that at least military personnel living up there on military property is Flag Circle, which is like the admiral and some senior commanders. So we anecdotally have that. Now, do we have enough to get to definitive conclusions? No, we're looking forward to get further data sets from the Census Bureau to do so. So in brief answers, yes, I was surprised that it saw a decline, but there's enough anecdotal evidence to make it not that much too unsurprising.
Yeah. What can you tell us about this slight 2% rise in housing units?
Well, one of the things we're going to examine when we get the information on not only household income, but household size is that changing demographics. For example, by the way, there is an affordable housing shortage, but one of the things we know that's contributing to that is demand for military personnel who are living in civilian areas. And that is putting the squeeze on affordable housing. So there is a demand for housing. It's considering the restriction H2 labor population is encouraging is actually expanded. But it may not necessarily address the needs of families and more the needs of individuals. We'll see when we get the household size information and become a better picture in that respect. Also, housing by household by profession, particularly in these geographic areas. And so we know what's the nature of the population living, how much that is active duty military, how much of this is active duty military independence. Those are the numbers we're curious to get a more precise picture of it as well. Now, it is a decline in population will have its impact, but In a certain sense, it's sort of a nominal. It's kind of even. I mean, I would not have been terribly excited if we had a 3.5% increase either, because it's less than 5%, and its actual impact on stuff is until we get deep into the data is kind of speculative at this point.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises Inc. and IT&E.
But I'm glad to have the data.
Yeah. Most villages, according to the report, preliminarily saw a decline in population, especially down south in places like Molesso and Humantac. Talk a little bit about that.
Telephone went up substantially. Yeah. The South has always been part of the charm of the South is that it is not a heavily populated area, and it sort of reflects the patterns of population there. So what was interesting was the sharp increase in population in Telefofo. That one as well. So, but it's and by the way, these numbers are not preliminary. They're top line numbers, but they are the numbers. They're not going to be adjusted later on. What we need later on are the data sets and the crosstabs to get information on household income, the size of households, veteran counts, populations. We're also seeking information on the homeless count. One of the processes that are involved in the 2020 census was not only going to house, but a process that was called group settings that counted people who weren't in homes, people who were, for example, incarcerated or institutionalized for medical reasons, and also homeless. And so we're looking as Guam confronts the homeless problem and develops new policies to address it. That information is going to be fairly important, and also I think will factor into federal funding opportunities as well.
Yeah. Speaking of homeless, will there be any statistics, or do you have any data or any information already about the amount of people that are below the poverty level on Guam? I know we've had, unfortunately, a high percentage over the past few, not few years, over many years. Do you have any information on that?
Well, all the information that's been released is all the information we have. Just to sort of clarify how this process worked. The 2020 Census of Guam was a process of going out and collecting the questionnaires and then and containing them at the census office in Tamuning. And then there was a separate census operation on base inside the fence line. And once those questionnaires were collected, they were sent down to the Tamuning office, and then the Tamuning office boxed them all up to send to U.S. Census Bureau in D.C. for tabulation. So there are no preliminary numbers beyond or that we have to judge this. All we have is the numbers that are released by the U.S. Census Bureau. Now, we have been asking for 2 years now for specific data sets, and we've had a good work and they listen at, but we have no commitments as to what specifically we're going to release, let alone when. Where we continue to pursue that matter, and I will in fact probably writing a letter to Congressman Nicholas to ask for his assistance to expedite the process. But we do know what information was collected, what data sets will be released in crosstabs. That we don't have a commitment by U.S. Census Bureau. So to answer your question about the poverty level, well, there were information on household income, and so that's one of the data sets we're anxious to get. We just don't have it yet, and we have no indications to when it would be released here. I'm just sad that we finally have the top line population data because the state's data was released in the summer, and the insular is released just now. But in all fairness, I have to mention that the insular area census operation was markedly different from the mainland census operation in that the census form was longer. On the mainland, in the states, they have the sort of rolling collection process, over the last decade, which the insular areas do not participate. And then this is all caught up on when the insular areas count is done. As a consequence, we have a longer census form. On the other hand, it's entirely based on enumeration, which means you go out house to house. And as opposed to the stateside operation, which relies a considerable much on online and mailer. So in many respects, it's a stronger tabulation result.
Yeah, and so we still don't have data sets, or you still don't have data sets as far as the number of Chamorros versus Filipinos versus FSM versus other ethnic groups? Right. None of that sort of stuff.
We have information. We have asked information on ethnicity, and that was part of the questionnaire. One of the more interesting things about the 2020 Census of Guam is that initially when it started out, and understand the census form is described by the U.S. Census Bureau, it's not described here, there was a citizenship question. Now, if you recall last in 2020, starting in 2019, there was this controversy about the citizen question, and the case was argued all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in documents provided in the court case, it was found out that Republican operatives were inserting the citizen question to the census form as a way of discouraging Hispanics from participating in the census, and thereby reducing the count of census to serve Republican political terms. This was an interesting thing. It was uncovered by in the papers of a deceased lobbyist by his daughter, and then it was ended up in court documents. So as a consequence, the U.S. Supreme Court in late 2019 struck down having the citizenship question in the U.S. Census form. Now, throughout that process, I was repeatedly asking the U.S. Census Bureau, does this affect the insular area census form? And I was told no, it did not. But as it turns out, a month after the Supreme Court decision, it was struck out of the 2020 Census of Guam questionnaire form here. Now, in many senses, we wanted the citizenship question there because, and it is sort of a different consideration than was the subject of the Supreme Court case. The thing they thought was asking the citizenship question would discourage possible illegal immigrants who reside in the U.S. from answering the questionnaire. Well, we were submitting the question for legal migrants, so it would, from our view, there was not that intimidating factor and would provide us valuable information. But that was struck out from the form for much to our disappointment. But we do have ethnicity information that was asked, and so that yes, that's part of the information. Household characteristics in terms of income and size and profession. Veterans as well count, and not only count of veterans, but a count of by which conflict they served in. That's kind of important because, as you know, modern veteran programs, it's recognized that's what's suitable for World War II or Korean Era veterans is doesn't quite fit the fit for Afghanistan and War Corps veterans. There's sort of different sets of problems here. So we're just looking for that information as well, and just to generally inform a lot of public policy. I should also mention here that this information, as you can sure appreciate, Nestor, is valuable for the private sector as well, particularly the housing numbers per village, and not just the population, but the housing numbers per village. I think it factors into a number of business plans. I had a conversation with Angie Camacho from the Guam Housing Corporation, who used to be a realtor before she took that position, and she was mentioning how a lot of that helps preparedly planning, also in housing policy, but also in other private sector housing enterprises, including realty and construction. So we're anxious to get that information for the benefit of not only public policy, but the broader community as well. I will say that some of this information is coming on a timely basis as the Bureau starts to embark on the Guam 2050 Sustainability Plan. Now, historically, this was the Comprehensive Development Plan, not to get too arcane, but there's the Comprehensive Development Plan law in the books. And it's the basis for all zoning laws and land use policies, because it defines what you build where and for what interest. And the last time this was fully updated was half a century ago, during Ricky Bridal's second term. He had this beautiful book called The Cabales. And there's been segments of it that have been updated, but still like half the island has not been updated for more than half a century. Now the legislature, the previous legislature updated the comprehensive plan to the Guam 2050 Sustainability Plan. So basically it's the same thing, but it'll be informed by sustainability principles. And so so you're not planning as to for what is there, but also what is sustainable. In which case, as you can imagine, population factors into that a lot. Now, and so having an accurate count of the population is really important at this juncture. I wanted to say this: the last time we had an actual count was the 2010 census, and you sometimes see population numbers for given years appear, but they're basically estimates by the Census Bureau. They take the 2010 as a basis and they project growth. So they're all estimates. This is the most recent full count we have on population in 10 years. And that, as Lisa, is a hard number. is important, I think, for any number of reasons.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises Inc. and IT&E.
Yeah, you touched on it and on the importance, just how important, and a lot of people probably don't even realize just how important the census information is, particularly to an organization such as BSP. You guys are sort of the gatekeepers of this. But if you had your druthers, what data sets would you want to get first, and why? And can you explain a little bit about what you would need this information and do with this information?
I'll give you 5. One of the first things that come to mind is veterans infant count and the homeless count. There's been a renewed interest in veterans. I think that the veterans count will be key to accessing a number of veterans programs here. The housing count will help that as well, but also shape what is, as you can see, an emerging policy to deal with homelessness, including not only dealing with vouchers, but there's now a second homeless shelter and addressing the continuum of needs here. I think the other things we'll probably take a look up is if we don't have a citizenship number, at least the ethnicity number to help inform, for example, compact impact reporting. But the characteristics of actual households by profession, by size, by income, to speak to your question of poverty, and where they're located, that'll be important. One use for it on a number of levels is I don't know if you're familiar with the federal policy for opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are where there are massive tax breaks for capital gains for investments in particular areas called opportunity zones. Well, those opportunity zones are these census tracts, the one you see the breakdown below village level. And basically this you identify census tracts that have a low income strata here. So this information, and then we're about to have another round where the governors of the territories and the states submit into the Treasury Department their recommendations for opportunity zones, and it's based on those census tracts. So that information sort of informs that policy for a tax break policy that is meant to foster and encourage and incentivize capital investment in what is economically depressed areas. Now there are kind of quirks in how that works here. I mean, they count the people who the household income of the people who actually live in the area, not necessarily the property values in the area. So one of the interesting things about census tracts here that you could have an area with a lot of high-priced hotels, but if all the workers are there live in that same area, that's what you count, even though you have all these high-priced hotels. That's all well and good, but again, it's a basis upon which you do that policy as well. I think that's the link here. But there's a sort of broad range of interest, not only for policy and private sector, but academic research by which this is derived. And like I said, this is the first population count, accurate hard count of the entire population. There have been segmentized counts here. There's been sampling over the years, but then actual count, this is the first one in 10 years. And that has its own value in and of itself, as opposed to previous counts and how they were used.
Yeah. Is there any data that isn't part of the census that you wish you had? And is there any way?
The citizenship question. The citizenship question would have been really helpful in terms of figuring out compact impact if you had a count as to how many FAS migrants are actually here. But you can derive some of that from ethnicity. It is not the same thing, as we know, because the migration is going on for a generation, and now you're dealing with ethnically FAS people, but are actually U.S. citizens because they were born here. But still, it's the sort of information you can inform to them. So I understand I'm very sympathetic with the issues debated in the Supreme Court case. And I think they certainly had merit. But one of the blowbacks of it was we lost information that and how we would use the decision question that would not be intimidating and not be discouraging of participation. So we sort of that's the only thing I sort of regret that's not in the current census 2020 Census of Guam census information. I should like to point out to you, beyond all the merits of the information here, one of the goals we set out for in the 2020 Census of Guam was not only to do this project efficiently, and it was done under trying circumstances in the middle of the pandemic, and to do it effectively, but to come up with a project that the community can take pride in. And I think this community can certainly vote Tyrone with the professional, effective, and efficient job done by Bernie Guinness, who was the census office manager, and the hundreds of people who worked on the 20 Census of Guam project here. In the midst of a pandemic, they pulled this off.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same satisfaction. In addition, it brought in $15 million into our economy and hired several hundred people in admittedly temporary jobs with actual employment, which was, it almost came at a really good time when particularly in the tourism and retail sectors, employment crashed, and we were still able to keep several hundred people employed to finish out the 2020 Census of Guam. So in that respect, that's a positive benefit to as well. That should have to be noted. And like I said, to me, at least here, I find a great source of pride to our community as well, that how effectively it was done. And don't take my word for it here. There was a U.S. Census Bureau representative advisor on station on Guam from September of 2019 to September of 2020. And so every step of the way, because it's basically a federal program we're doing, we had to sort of meet federal standards. And from both informal and formal comments, they've been very pleased with the result and how this project was carried out.
Yeah, they have that unimaginable additional challenge of doing this through a pandemic.
And just anecdotally, just what happened was the original framework was to go house to house and then do the interviews at each house on their doorsteps or on the driveway. Well, that crashed with the pandemic. So what was happened was there were notices and packages that were done house to house. To have them call a call center that was quickly leveraged up in the winning office, they brought in 60 new lines in there, and enumerators who were distributing the notes were quickly converted into and basically telephone operators, and the interviews were conducted by phone, and they got the job done. And even after a couple of months to delay to retool everything, they were able to get it all completed by actually well ahead of the mainland can, actually, come to think of it.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.
Yeah. And how is BSP preparing to receive this information and convert that into programs and funding for the people of Guam?
Well, for one thing, you can the 2020 Census of Guam information, the current release information is publicly available on our website at bsp.guam.gov, and you can it's easy to navigate to bring up all the data we have, which is good so far, and then as it comes in, we plan to post it on the website, so it's available not for anyone who wants to access information for uses that we could not possibly dream of or would not necessarily occur to us. It's a matter of getting the information out there, and then people will use it as needed here. That's the value of the information. It's not only that we have it, but it's publicly available.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's it. Thanks a lot, Nestor, for the time. And we'll talk again, I'm sure.
All right. Yeah. As you get more data sets, let us know, and then we can have you on, and you can help us
We'll go through it there, and we'll put the planners to work on it, and we'll come to some definitive conclusions here. Even at this point here, I know we're waiting for feedback from some of the housing agencies and the housing numbers, and there's some information on, particularly on the military build-up planning people. Enough of the housing counts and the population counts on base are of interest to them as well.
All right, that's Tyrone Taitano. He's the director of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans. Thanks for joining us, Ty. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And I'm Nestor Licanto. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you again next week on In Full Zoom.
In Full Zoom is presented by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. and IT&E.